This is a demonstration on how I like to do crochet chain stitch followed by single crochet. The markers I'm going to use in a little bit. The very first loop on my hook I make with a slip knot, and I do that by bringing my yarn into a circle. Whichever yarn is on top, you're going to reach down to the circle and grab that yarn and pull up a loop. You're not pulling the tail through, just pulling a loop through your circle to make a slip knot, and that's going to go on your hook, which goes in your dominant hand. Keep everything a little loose if you can throughout. I hold the tail alongside of my hook just so it's out of my way, and with my non-dominant hand, I wrap the yarn around twice like this. My hand is going away from me as it passes under the yarn, so the yarn comes in front of my finger as it goes to the work. Index finger stays up in the air, and I'm going to hold onto the bump of the slip knot with my middle finger and thumb. This is my basic position. Now, keeping the hook part facing me, I bring the hook end towards me and then under and behind the yarn to catch a wrap. Catch that in my hook. A little kind of twirl of the hook downwards, it's less than a quarter turn, and draw that through the loop I have. And notice I'm holding this taut to keep it a little loose and open. And as I pull it through, I'm going to drag through some yarn, make sure it's a little loose on the big part of my hook, and I'm going to let go and hold on at the base of that loop and start again. I always have this gentle tension kind of pulling apart here. So again, the hook comes towards me, away from me and under the yarn to catch the yarn, a little turn, draw through, jump up my hold, and I'm going to keep doing that until I have enough chains, making sure that I keep holding on close and keep everything a little bit loose. You can see some air in that loop. I'm going to keep doing this until it is as many stitches as I need for my project, or about as wide as I need for my project. Before I start the next row, I'm going to take one of my markers and I'm going to mark the last chain that I made, which is the loop, the thing that's right behind or underneath the loop on my hook. So if I follow this loop towards the ball of yarn, passes through something, and I'm going to stick my marker in that as well. Let me pull this a little closer. There, so I'm not marking the loop on the hook, I'm marking the next stitch down, which is the last chain stitch that I made. Now, crochet chain has two sides. One side is sort of flat, kind of looks like a braid. You want to look at the other side, which is the bumpy side. I'm going to skip the very first chain. That has a marker in it, so it's easy to spot. I'm going to skip this and go to the next one. And this is the bump that I'm talking about here. Each chain has 3 strands, and I want the middle one that's sticking up towards me. So I'm going to put my hook under the bump and only the bump, push it a little farther and come up behind the yarn, catch the yarn and draw up a loop through the bump, resulting in 2 loops in my hook. And then it's helpful to let go and hold on underneath the newest loop so you can keep everything loose. Catch the yarn. This is called yarn over, but really the hook dips under and behind the yarn. And then draw that through both loops. And I'm down to 1 loop on my hook, and I've made 1 single crochet stitch. And I'm going to go into the very next loop, no more skipping. So under the next bar, catch the yarn and draw up a loop. Catch the yarn and draw through both loops on my hook. I'm going to switch to more correct terminology, less descriptive but more common. So I'm going to insert my hook underneath the bump, yarn over, and draw up a loop. Yarn over and draw through both loops. See how my left hand kind of jumps around to hold in different places. So into my bump, yarn over and draw up a loop, hold close, yarn over and draw through 2 loops. Hold next to my bump, into my bump, yarn over and draw up a loop, hold underneath, yarn over and draw through both. So I'm now done my first row, and you can see it's got these V's on the top edge. Because the way I worked into the project, it's also got V's on the bottom edge. But you can tell the top edge because that's where my loop is coming out of. To start my next row, I'm going to start with a turning chain. So I want to make this loop a little big, yarn over and draw through that loop to do a chain. And I'm going to pick up my second marker and mark that chain. And like before, what I'm marking is where the yarn goes through as it transforms from the loop into the yarn that goes to the ball. And I'm going to turn my work like I'm turning the page in a book. This turning chain counts as the first stitch in my row. Therefore, I'm not going to put a stitch in the first V that I could go into and go into the second one. You might notice you can't see the V's as much here. If you tip it over, you can still see them, but they do tilt away from you. You also might see little holes in your work, especially if you're working nice and loose like I am. So, loop on my hook, chain with a marker, first stitch I'm skipping, second stitch I'm going to go into. So I go in making sure I catch both strands of that V, yarn over and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2 loops. So the stitch I'm doing is the same single crochet, I'm just doing it into single crochets of the previous row as opposed to into a turning chain. No more skipping, so I go into the next stitch, make sure I got both strands of my V, yarn over and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2 loops. You might kind of get on a nice rhythm here. The very last one tends to be a little messy, so I still have a V, but it's just sort of gotten relaxed, so take your time, make sure you get both strands. If you just catch one or the other, you might get a loose spot. Now I'm out of V's, but I'm not done my row. Remember at the beginning I said the turning chain counts as a stitch? The turning chain from the last row needs to get worked into before this row is done. And the marker's here like a little reminder. So there's this funny little lump of yarn, it kind of looks like a knot. Don't worry too much about where, but just push your hook in and see if you caught 2 strands, which I did, in which case you're going to give it your single crochet. If you only catch 1 strand, take your hook out and try it again. And now I'm done the row and I've finished, and it's nice and squared off. So to start a new row again, make your loop a little big, do your chain stitch, now you can move up the marker from the same side of the work. Turn your work around. We're going to skip the first stitch of the row, which is after your chain, and go into the second one to start. And continue doing your single crochets. And it's really normal to need to slow down as you get to the end of the row, beginning of the row transition. Don't feel bad about that. Here's my last V. It's a little messier than the neighbors. And then here I need to work into the turning chain. So I'm going to just try somewhere. I got 2 strands there crisscross, but there's still 2 there. So I'm good to keep going. Start my next row. Make my loop big. Make a chain. Move my marker up. Turn it around. Skip the first stitch and go into the second one. It does get easier with practice, but these markers help a lot when you're new because you don't have to guess about where the last stitch of the row goes in. I hope that was helpful.